When your most depraved wish comes true, is that ever going to end well? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today I have a review for you of At Midnight We Possess the Damned. This is a novella by Andre Duza and Nick Cato, and it is published in January of 2025 by Death Heads Press. And this is a mean little bloody, grimy, sleazy horror novella, and I loved it. I thought it was great. The story is really simple. It follows a character, Gary, who is a obsessed horror fan. He loves horror movies. He is a fledgling / failed filmmaker himself, and the story starts with him getting to fulfill his wish of seeing an actual snuff film, which he has this perverted desire to see, and he gets more than he bargained for with this film and with this experience, and then the plot moves on from there. Him falling into the world of snuff films and of making snuff films and what it means to be on either side of the camera of a snuff film. I think one of the smartest things about this story is the writing. The writing is really pointed and direct, and it manages to paint Gary, who is obsessed with these horror films, as kind of a loser. Like, his obsession with horror is to the point where it's a little sad, yet in showing off that obsession, the story manages to name check some really amazing horror films and filmmakers that are really underground, really kind of cult classics. And I think it's a safe assumption to say that many of the fans of these authors and of this style of literature are also fans and obsessives of that kind of horror film. So it's able to respect that fandom and poke fun of it a little bit at the same time, and it does it in a really cheeky kind of way. So I thought that was great. I thought the writing was really playful. The writing itself was really propulsive. Like, you didn't really take breaks. There are time jumps when there needed to be time jumps, and it slowed down when it needed to slow down. So it was really a page turner in that way. And like I said, it's a novella. It's not very long. It reads really quickly. And the writing felt very skilled in that it gave you enough kind of detail to paint out a scene to see a larger world, but it really felt like all the fat and gristle was cut away. Like, it was a very lean style of writing that was just kind of pointed in one direction and very movement based, if that makes sense. So I thought the writing was really skillful. The plotting itself was good. There was no wasted moments. So you had they used snide comments and asides from the main character to be moments of developing character and doing world building. There were no exposition dumps. There was no backstory. There are so many mysteries that are unanswered due to some of the people that he is working with and the circles they run in, that it could have gone into these long sections of nothing but exposition trying to fill in that backstory, but very smartly it doesn't do that. It just gives you what you need and it paints a picture. So in that way, I thought the plotting was really good. Now, some of that, I would have liked more of that. What I do have for criticism of the story is that it felt very abrupt in some ways, and that is because it was so streamlined. So while I appreciate that streamlined nature and it really pulled you through and it made you want to turn pages, I would have liked a little more to it. I would have liked a little more meat on those bones. There are some backstories that I felt they could have gone into, and I can appreciate that if not handled well, it would have just been a side quest that wouldn't have mattered, or it could have been a distraction from the main story. I appreciate that. It wouldn't be an easy thing to do, but there is more there. Like, they present so many big pictures that they could have gone into and just added a little more heft to the story. And that comes along with the way the story ends. It again feels very abrupt. It feels like an appropriate ending, like where the journey the character goes on, where he ends up, feels appropriate for that character's journey. And there is a journey for this character who begins the story with this kind of infatuation and this obsession, and then he quickly realizes that he's in over his head but doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't know what it means to be a moral person who's engaging in these immoral actions. And so it's asking interesting questions, and he goes on this journey, but it seems like he jumps around, and where he gets to at the end of the journey is an appropriate ending place, but getting there felt really rushed, at least at the end. So I would have just liked a little more depth, and I would have liked if there were parts where weren't so rushed or abrupt feeling. However, with that said, the writing style being so abrupt, it did keep me entertained, and it kept me invested in the story as it moved along. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So there are definitely pros and cons to this kind of streamlined writing. The main character was interesting. He was well developed. He felt genuine, especially in his nerdiness and the way he loved horror, and the chip he had on his shoulder for feeling like his genius as a filmmaker wasn't appreciated, and the only reason he was failing in this business was not due to his own lack of ambition or skill, but because others didn't see what a genius he was, or they took the opportunities away from him. He was really well portrayed, and he felt real. I've met people like him, or in that same vein. So he felt genuine to me. I really appreciated his character. All the other ancillary characters were kind of throwaway characters. We didn't spend a lot of time with them. We got to know just a little bit about them. For the purposes of the story, that was fine. If the story wanted to be built out a little bit more, it would have been interesting to have at least one or two people in his life who served as foils to him that allowed his inner journey to have more conflict, right? Because as it was, he wasn't bouncing against anyone. He was only fighting with himself about whether or not this was the right thing to do, whether he was in over his head, whether he was becoming a bad person, quote unquote, and where that line between attachment and lust and money and morality, like what you can sacrifice, he was only arguing with himself. So if there had been at least some other character where he could have bounced off of, I think that would have been more interesting, and it would have given us a wider array of characters. The characters we did have, the people that were in this, nefarious world that he was joining, they are like shadows, basically. You learn a little bit about them, and it would have been nice to learn more, but just the way he participated in that world was so kind of hesitant that you didn't get a chance to learn more about them. So it worked for the story they were telling, but I could envision a story where instead of a novella, you added an extra 50, 70 pages to this, made it a short novel, and in so doing, built out those characters and that world a little more. I think that would have been possible, and I would have really appreciated that story as well. But for the purposes of this novella, it worked. The sketches of characters essentially did their job, though it did lead to this rush and abrupt feeling at the end. Now, this book, for being a book that focuses on someone who loves horror movies and becomes involved in snuff films, it isn't overly saturated with gore, but the moments you do have of gore and violence are bloody, they're messy, they are chaotic, and they're really, really fun, if that is your thing. They're not there on every single page, but when they come up, they don't hold back. So there are some really graphic scenes in this, which give it just a little bit of energy and a little bit of danger to the story. There's also at least one kind of action set piece in the story, which you wouldn't quite expect, but it is there. And it's more or less well executed. It is tense and it keeps you, unsure of what is going to happen. So they do a good job of building tension in these set pieces and of using them as opportunities to just spill a lot of blood and be a little bit over the top. And that is then countered by his like interiority and his uncertainty of what he's doing and of whether this life is something he wants to continue with. For a little splatter horror novel, I think it balances those two things really well. A novel or a novella like this, you don't expect it to be asking big questions. It's this nasty, grimy little violent story, but it is asking these questions about your morality. What would you sacrifice if something that you've always desired or some version of it is made available to you? And how malleable is your moral center when your attachment and your excitement and your lust and your desires and your greed all and your wish for recognition and fame, all of these worldly concerns, they rear their heads and they promise things to you. How easy is it to move away from your moral center? And is that ever going to end well? If you give up what it is that makes you a moral person to seek out these things, never mind that this is about snuff films, so there's never any morality in that, right? But even if when these things that you've wanted so long, the only way you can achieve them is by giving up whatever keeps you centered as like a good person. Where is that line for you? How malleable is it? So the story does play with these ideas, which I think is compelling and is interesting for a little blood-soaked, splattery, grimy novella. Those things don't have to come up, and they're not. There's definitely no preaching on it, but it's all the subtext is what is it that is driving Gary, and he's constantly questioning whether this is the right decision or not. And so it really draws you in to where are your own lines and what kind of moral grayness is appropriate if it means you're getting your quote unquote heart's desire. So even in this nasty little story, there's a lot to think about. But I think that is all I have to say. I had a lot of fun with this story. It's quick, dirty, nasty, bloody, and if those things sound interesting to you, I bet you will have fun with it as well. Both of the authors, Andre Duza and Nick Cato, have written other stories in this kind of genre. And so I'd love to hear if you've read any of their other work or if you've had a chance to read this novella yet. What did you think about it? What do you think about these authors? It'd be great to hear whatever you have to say down in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.